welcome to the Bible study. My name is Kent Philpott, pastor of Miller Avenue Baptist Church in Mill Valley, California. We are in Acts chapter 19, beginning of verse 21, and it is titled A Riot at Ephesus. A riot at Ephesus. So, here is where very religious people begin to attack Christianity. And that makes sense because if Christianity was right, these guys talking about Jesus and what he did is true, well, it meant that they were going astray. And that is very impactful. I remember that happening to me too when I was age 21, when I began to be confronted with Christianity. And it scared me. And so we understand why people at Ephesus, which was extremely religious, I mean, it was awful. By the way, Ephesus is in what we'd call southern Turkey today, so it was a big deal. And every spring in Ephesus, people flocked to Ephesus for a week's worth of wild celebration. And every day in Ephesus at night, 1,000 prostitutes would come into the city for you know what. And so this was a very strange place. Population of 200,000 plus. So we're looking at this, Acts chapter 19, verse 21. And it is titled in English. I use the English Standard Version. I've used probably about 6 or 7 different translations throughout the course of my ministry. And, nobody can say one translation is better than another, but I like the newer translations, but I really like the English Standard Version. Verse 21. Now, after these events, Paul resolved in the Spirit. In other words, he felt that was the guidance of the Holy Spirit, resolved in the Spirit to pass through Macedonia and Achaia and go to Jerusalem, saying, after I have been there, I must also see Rome. Paul's plan. This is what he was hoping to do. The person who wrote Acts was a Gentile. He was a doctor. His name was Luke. And we're going to find it, we're going to start seeing the word we pretty quick, where Luke actually becomes a part of the people that are traveling with Paul. So, and Luke is writing this. By the way, writing it for who or why, there wasn't any such thing as, we're creating the New Testament. No, that wasn't going on. The book of John wasn't written. Mark was probably written. Matthew and Luke probably hadn't been written. This guy wrote the Gospel of Luke, and probably he wrote the Gospel of Luke after he wrote the book of Acts. So we have a very interesting time here. And so he's going to go through Macedonia. That would have been northern Italy. And Achaia, that would have been part of what is now southern Italy. And go to Jerusalem. He wants to go to Jerusalem. There's a particular time he wants to get there. And he says, I must also see Rome. Somehow he said that. Luke remembered it. And here we have it. By the way, the early Bibles, they didn't have any chapters, didn't have any verses associated with it. That came much, much later on in Latin versions of the Bible. Verse 22, and having sent into Macedonia 2 of his helpers, again, northern Greece, Timothy and Erastus. Now, Timothy, in the New Testament, Paul wrote 2 different letters to Timothy, 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy, and Erastus, which we know very little about. And it says, he himself stayed in Asia, that is Turkey, for a while. no reason is given for why Paul was going to stay there, but that's what it is. Verse 23. About that time. Now, interesting time. In the Greek are two words for time. One is chronos, one is kairos. Chronos is day by day, week by week, year by year. Kairos, and that's the word here, kairos, is a different word for time. It's not as specific. So right away we see Luke doesn't know exactly how long, maybe forgot or wasn't aware. About that time there arose no little disturbance concerning the way. The way, in the Greek it's hodou, H-O-D-O-U. That's putting the English letters in place of the Greek. The way. The early church would be called the way. Remember Jesus said the way, the truth, and the life. Well, the way meant being a follower of Jesus. There was no little disturbance. There was disturbance. There will always be a disturbance where there is genuine Christianity. Always be. Always going to be trouble. In all of the years, 55 years of being a pastor, I can well attest. Verse 24 is going to say how. For a man named Demetrius, a silversmith, it means they would take silver, heat it up, and they would mold it, carve it in various ways. I was not able to find a description of what that looked like. But they would take silver, who made silver shrines of Artemis, which was a goddess. And it's not a Greek name. Artemis is not a Greek name, but it was a goddess that was widely worshipped. Okay. Who made silver shrines of Artemis. Brought no little business to the craftsmen. So this guy, Demetrius, he was kind of at the high end of it. Provided the silver, sold the silver, marketed the silver, whatever it was. And it says, but no little. Luke sells no little business to the craftsmen. So that's a big deal. Wow. These he gathered together with the workmen in similar trades and says, men, you know that from this business we have our wealth. Okay. Well, they didn't want these people turning from the worship of the goddess Artemis to becoming followers of Jesus. They were going to lose a lot of money. This is all about money here. I had a note here that Artemis was a goddess that was venerated over the entire civilized world, not just in Ephesus. This was a big deal back in those days. How long this had been so, we don't know. I was not able to discover anything that would indicate how long. And he said, and this is Demetrius, you know that from this business we have our wealth. Problems. Two things were threatened. Truth about what they believed about Artemis, but also the money they made from selling the little things that they made, and it's hard to know, a picture or a little statue, small statue of a female goddess of some way, or exactly what it was. I wasn't able to figure it out. But anyway, they were doing this. And so they're concerned, if all of these people start turning away from Artemis and starting believing this Jewish Jesus, well, that's not good for us. Okay, verse 26. And you see and hear that not only in Ephesus, but in almost all of Asia. Now, Asia at that time was referring to what we know as titled as Turkey. If you get out your map, Turkey, that's in the old days, in days of Paul, that area was called Asia. Almost all of Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away a great many people, saying that gods made with hands are not gods. Well, we can easily see that, but for maybe who knows how many generations, that if you bought one of the little silver depictions of Artemis, well, that was like your goddess. That's who you worshiped, who you paid attention to. So, and here it says, was turned away a great many people, saying the gods that made with hands are not gods. Wow. So we find this is what I would call the first Great Awakening. This was huge. The numbers were hard to define, but are very large. A Great Awakening. And it says, and there is danger not only that this trade of ours may come into disrepute, lose your jobs, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis may be counted as nothing, and that she may even be deposed from her magnificence, she whom all Asia and the world worshipped. Now, all of this is from Demetrius. Now, this guy was pretty smart. I mean, he could see the writing on the writing on the wall. Pretty simple. You have all these people not worshiping Artemis, but now are listening to Paul as he describes Jesus, who Jesus is, and what Jesus did. And the power of the Holy Spirit descending, many of these people becoming followers of Jesus. It's a big deal, a really big deal here. And the guy is right. The guy is completely right. The temple that was made for Artemis was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It was 425 feet long, 200 feet wide. There were 127 marble columns, all of which were 6 feet 2 inches high. One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And so that's what it is. And so this is what Demetrius presents to these people. Verse 28. When they heard this, they were enraged and were crying out. The Western text adds, they ran out into the street. You know, there are 4 different categories of manuscripts in the New Testament. This one, the Western text is the second, and the Caesarean, the Koine. This is the Alexandrian. All of them have hundreds of manuscripts in them, from the very oldest to the more recent. And by the way, ESV is based upon the Alexandrian, the oldest papyri and the oldest editions of the gospel letters, and etc. That's one of the reasons why a lot of people move to things like the NIV, RSV, ESV, and so on. They want the best. We're never exactly correct. The estimates are about 95, 96% on it right now. So they were outraged. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. So the city was filled with the confusion, and they rushed together into the theater, which seated between 20,000 and 25,000 seats, dragging with them Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians, who were Paul's companions in travel. Now, it looks like they couldn't find Paul. I don't know. The writer Luke does not tell us. But they got 2 guys who would have been with Paul, would have been obvious they were Paul's friends, Gaius and Aristarchus. And so they got him. They got a hold of him, having to deal with this. Things were going wild. And there were Macedonians who were Paul's companions in travel. They couldn't find Paul. Verse 30. But when Paul wished to go in among the crowd, the disciples would not let him. Interesting. Paul had a lot of courage. Great courage, really. When he found out what was happening to two of his close companions, he was going to go and deal with it. But the disciples, the other people, by the way, disciple means a learner. All Christians are disciples, would not let him. Verse 31, and even some of the Asiarchs, those are high-ranking officers of the local government. I want to say that again. They were high-ranking officers of the local government. And this is called the Asiarchs, who were friends of his, sent to him and were urging him not to venture into the theater. So they'd gathered in this big theater, 25,000 seated, big place. And so that's where it was all going on, and they said they were urging Paul not to go there, because if they found Paul, that could be bad. Verse 32. Now some cried out one thing, some another, for the assembly was in confusion, and most of them did not know why they had come together. Now the word assembly I want to bring out is in the Greek ekklesia, usually translated church. Here it's just translated assembly, grouping. Did not know why they had come together. There was panic was going on in Ephesus. Verse 33. Some of the crowd promoted Alexander, a Jewish man, whom the Jews had put forward. And they, of course, the Jewish people oppose idol worship. And Alexander, motioning with hand, wanted to make a defense to the crowd. Alexander was likely known as an eloquent speaker. There were a large number of Jewish people who lived in Ephesus, and then who did not believe in Artemis as the god. So we have this incredible thing going on here. And he motioned with his hands, whatever, and wanted to make a defense to the crowd. There's a lot of curiosity that goes into what this is all about. Luke is not as explanatory as we wish he had been. It would have probably been very interesting, but we don't have it, and very difficult to fill in the blanks and hope we're right. Verse 34. But when they recognized that he was a Jew, for about 2 hours they all cried out with one voice, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." Wow. 2 hours. So both the Christians and the Jews refused to worship the goddess Artemis. So they all cried out with one voice, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." Wow. So we don't know if Alexander was a Jewish believer in Jesus or whether he was a spokesperson for the Jews who lived in Ephesus. We don't know. Verse 35. And when the town clerk, that would have been the guy in charge, when the town clerk had quieted the crowd, he was alarmed. The language indicates to us that he was very alarmed about what was going on. He said, "Men of Ephesus, who is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is temple keeper to the great Artemis and of the great stone that fell from the sky?" So this is what happened. This is the town clerk. Would have been a Roman, wouldn't not necessarily have been a worshiper of Artemis. So he had to quiet the crowd, calm them down. And men of Ephesus, and I'd like to point out that it is likely that this word and the way people wrote that in that day would include women as well. Who is there who does not know that the city of of the Ephesians is temple keeper, the great Artemis. Okay. And of the sacred stone that fell from the sky. Well, some people say it was probably a meteorite, or that there was a statue of Artemis that just appeared. And the commentators, some will say one, some will say no, some will say, okay, we don't have any real idea. But something had happened, but my opinion, probably a meteorite fell and may have been carved into a statue of Artemis. Just a Philpott idea. Okay, verse 36. Seeing then that these things cannot be denied, I mean, that was plain as day. This is what they had been experiencing. One thing that's absent here is the when. What year, what decade did this happen? It obviously had been going on for some length of time. We don't know. Verse 36. Seeing then that these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rash. He says, you ought, and do nothing rash. Now, I have a little note over this, and I see this as the hand of God in action here. That this is a word of the Holy Spirit coming out of this man, this Roman person of authority. Because things could have gotten really bad. I actually see this as a sign of the working of the Holy Spirit. Because mayhem could have proceeded, and it could have been disastrous for Paul, Timothy, and all those others who were some of the leading people that were with Paul, including, well, not yet. Anyway, I'll keep that for another program. Verse 37, for you have brought these men here who are neither sacrilegious nor blasphemers of our goddess. These Christians were not bad-mouthing Artemis at all. They spoke nothing against that worship that they saw. It wasn't going to be something that they were even going to deal with. They weren't going to be having that kind of conversation, which would have just embroiled everybody, and it would have proved to make a very chaotic circumstance. So he says they're not attacking your goddess. They're not attacking Artemis at all. Verse 38. If therefore Demetrius and the complaint and the craftsmen, these are the ones who are building, making all their money after little carved Artemises. If therefore Demetrius and the craftsmen with him have a complaint, actually in the Greek the word is logon, have a word against them, but a negative word, so that here the ESV uses the word complaint against them, and the courts are open. You know, the Romans had a very sophisticated structure of how they ran things, from their courts to what would be the police officers, etc. They were very sophisticated. We don't really know how very structured and just well done was the way that the Romans conducted the civility, conducted the way things were. But it was very sophisticated. We know that for sure. Now he says, if therefore Demetrius and the craftsmen with him having complained against someone, the courts are open, and there are proconsuls. In the Roman province, these would be government heads, the real power people. He says, let them bring charges against one another. Okay, let's handle it in court. You say this, you got to say this. So you match it, instead of just mayhem happening and people just being slaughtered and so on, let's do it in a civil way, make it all work, let it be done according to how we operate. Verse 39. But, and really the word but, I would have put it the word or or if you seek anything further, it shall be settled in the regular assembly. There was the danger of Roman intervention here. We don't know what forces of the Roman forces were there, but they would be there. And so he says, we're going to take care of this in the regular assembly. Verse 40 says, for we really are in danger of being charged with rioting today. Okay, here comes the warning to these Ephesian people whose whole life and so much of their business has been radically challenged. Radically challenged. How much Satan has been involved in that as well, we don't know. But even without the working of Satan, just to have your whole system upset would have been enough to produce this kind of wild craziness that was taking place. It would be interesting to see a filmmaker have a way of filming what that was. I doubt it would be even possible today. So, for we, he says, we really are in danger of being charged with rioting today, since there's no cause that we can give to justify this commotion. Okay. Last verse. And when he had said these things, he dismissed the assembly. So no real reason for starting a riot and forcing the Romans to quell the trouble. I have a little note here that the person who was speaking this was the town clerk. Okay. The main point, the Christian gospel was not contrary to the Roman rule of law and would not disrupt the public order. But the demonic worship of Artemis was awful, and that could have led to a real disaster. Luke gives us this real history. That's why I love the book of Acts. I think in my lifetime, the fourth time I preached through it. And so that's it. And we're going to be moving on in the book of Acts. And until then, so long.